Questions. Yeah, got our disclaimer here. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar on security and productivity with remote workforce, navigating your financials. Let me introduce myself to you. My name is Ben Meller. I'm a Chief Revenue Officer here at Brightworks Group, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. We also have Jared Epstein with us from Timus Networks. Timus is going to be doing the majority of today's talk today. We're going to keep it really high level on talking about security and productivity with the remote workforce and navigating your financials. We have today's webinar recorded, and if you have any questions along the way, you can put it in the chat, and we'll definitely get to it and get through with you on that as well. When it comes to Brightworks Group, we are a technology IT consulting company headquartered in Indiana here, but we do cover North America for all of our solutions. We do really well in the network infrastructure and edge world. We do really well in the cloud and advanced data center, and do really good in digital workplace. But one of our specialties, which we're going to talk a lot about today with Timus as well, is security and resilience. And the Timus Group has done a fantastic piece in regards to productivity and security with how they look at that and handle that with remote workers. And that's what today's topic is and what we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Jared Epstein. And Jared, I'm going to pass this off to you now.
Thank you, Ben. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time. And I look forward to running through this. Timus Networks will talk more about kind of who we are and what we do. But I am our head of partnerships, and I am based in New York City. I've worked in the IT space for many years now, working really with IT professionals and executives on networking, infrastructure, data center connectivity, and looking forward to talking about security productivity with your remote, hybrid, or in-office workforce, right? And again, how do the two tie together? And as I go immediately in, for myself included, I think all of us can probably allude to the fact that efficiency, productivity, and doing more with less is a topic in every business, whether you're a Fortune 50 company or a 30-person company to a 10-person company. How can we maximize our resources from staff to tools to everything across the board? And it's in the news, it's talking about it and turning about it everywhere. So I'm going to start on that front. I'll pause for a moment. Does anyone here, you could put into the chat, does anyone have a fully remote workforce? Are people hybrid, a bit of a mix? And for context with Timus Networks, we are fully remote. We have a global presence, and I'll talk more about the product and what we're doing. Hybrid, okay, hybrid. So being in New York City, I haven't been in office in the last 4 years. Not sure why, still here, but love the city and not in the office, but as a worker, I'm leading a team here. And remote work is something that's top of mind for me on a day-to-day basis. And that's what our product is kind of based around, remote connectivity. For context, where this isn't going to be a demo, in the sense that we work with service providers and IT professionals to keep users connected and protected. Wanted to use this opportunity to speak to this kind of the narrow lens that I have is in speaking with, again, leaders every day as to kind of how they're navigating this, whether with Timus or again, different solutions or with homegrown tools. But ultimately, again, productivity and security can go to tug of war. We need our users to be connected. We need them to be protected. And ultimately, again, how can we maximize people's days without working them to death, but also again, making sure that we're making business decisions based on data. And although and as a leader, I look at my team and I look at metrics and I look at data, my partner, she's in HR. A lot of these metrics that I thought were leading indicators are really lagging indicators, whether it's revenue, calls, emails for salespeople. But for ownership or IT, again, it can be help desk and ticket count, timeline to resolution, revenue, profits, success with employees. These are things that can happen after the real work is put in. And how do you really track that in an easy way? And that's where I'm going to go to next. And part of why it's important, and I hope some people get a laugh out of this, is there's a way to manipulate everything, and this isn't to be pessimistic, but how do we get the real data and how can we make decisions based on what is real? And for an example, we use Slack internally. There's a baby picture of me. But for Slack and Teams, for example, if you have YouTube open for a video and this is 11 hours, you leave it open it's essentially you're looking like you're online. I remember the days of like, again, you have to show you're online if you're stepping away for a 2 hour lunch. Um, that would qualify me as not the most productive user. And that could be the same thing for phone calls. That could be emails. That could be tickets closing prematurely for IT teams. I think we could probably all relate to some form of this. So stepping into, and I'll go to the security part after. Timus, we're really excited about the productivity component of the tool, and whether it's Timus or something again that you're doing internally. Want to talk about can staff behavior dictates such a big portion of your success, regardless of kind of what the company is doing, whether it's financial services, insurance, manufacturing. I mean, across the board, it really comes from the team, right? And although we're a zero trust network access solution, so I'll talk more about the connectivity piece. Our agent is able to pick up everything that's happening on the computer. So for managed devices, we can capture who are the most productive users, who are the most productive teams, what are the most productive apps, and also tracking that trend line, right? Like, are we seeing that there's a lull in productivity on people working on, let's say, Thursday at 2 o'clock? That might be a good opportunity to throw a meeting on the books internally to do some training or and take the necessary actions. Um, but the dashboards with automated reporting that can give you the granular insights. Are they on YouTube, or are they looking at to look at learning their product or learning to better your business? Or are they looking at videos while they're or leaving videos open rather while they're taking a 2 to 3 hour lunch? So although this can be used for in kind of big brother purposes, we do want to emphasize this is really meant for again giving that high level data. And it is for context and as to what it's pulling and how it's pulling it. It's capturing the most dominant tab on the PC. So if I have 30 tabs open like I do now, it's going to capture Zoom in front of me. That could be Excel as well, and that would actually show me what that Excel file was. Like, am I putting together my top 10 vacation destinations, or am I working on that spreadsheet that I need to get in before the end of the week? And going back to this, really can driving everything based, business decision, making business decisions based on the data that you're seeing. I think a lot of people, leaders want people in the office to have eyes on them, right? And this isn't about having eyes on an individual person, but like the teams themselves, the rate, again, the groups, specific apps, and in the IT space specifically, an implementation. Are people spending the necessary time in there for that new implementation you're doing that needs to go live for the sake of the business? And if so, who are those users that are really killing it, right? And I think there's ways to look at this, and can this be negative? And like to point out negative things, absolutely. But I think it's also a great way to point out who's really putting in the work and putting in the effort that's going to yield those lagging indicators that I mentioned before. I'm going to pause for a moment. Of you guys with the hybrid workforce, I'm curious if you could put a comment in it. Are you tracking anything like this today? And if so, or is this kind of top of mind as leaders across different departments? And and Ben, if you mind chiming in, kind of how you guys think about productivity amongst your team within Brightworks. I'd love to kind of hear your perspective here.
Yeah, productivity across our works is definitely, with our team, we have a hybrid model as well. And so we absolutely are kind of in the office, but we're also remote, those pieces of it. And when we manage that productivity, it is something that we'll think about, right? It's the things that you just brought up are basically driven by the business, and figuring out what's working and what's not. And it's not always easy to assume what's happening with the workforce. And this is kind of an interesting insight into that.
Thanks, Ben. And as a remote company and leader, again, something that like I don't, our CEO, she looks at this, our CTO looks at this. I don't have privilege to this for my team, but I do get the report, separating it from my team as to kind of like, and where are we making our most efforts on a day or week basis. Jim, thank you for the question. I can jump in and ask this, answer these now. For a time bound workforce where 2 or 3 hour lunch is fine. So how would that be handled? So you can actually segment this based on schedules. And that also parlays into the BYOD scenario. This can be turned on based on the user as well as device. So if it's a company managed device, I'd imagine you probably want it to be on. For BYOD, because we do work with tablets and mobile devices, and just don't have those on, definitely not for mobile. I don't think iOS even allows that. But you can set a schedule to this, because you want to see, because if someone's, let's say, playing Poker Stars, for example, or they're watching movies and Netflix, I'm sure again at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, probably not ideal, but 7:30, okay, right? It's not necessarily a malicious site. One thing that is cool.
Are some of our top developers are night owls and keep weird schedules, and I don't care when they work. They're
Yeah.
not direct customer facing. So I
Yep.
got one guy who, man, he puts in more pull requests between my sleeping and my waking hours than anybody I've ever seen. So I really don't give a crap if he only works 4 hours between 8 and 5 because he's
Right.
working 10 hours or 12 hours a day. Not because
Right.
I tell him to, but because he likes it. So how do I? And I think if I were monitoring him, he's watching YouTube. Hell, he might be watching YouTube right now, but he turns out a lot of work. So how do I manage and it's his own computer because he's got a machine way more
Yep.
expensive than I'm willing to buy him.
So that's a good point, and I can relate to a previous boss that I had that was this, who kind of had a similar sentiment. Jim was like, look, if you're gonna excel in what you're doing, if you're online at 5 and you want to be at 5 a.m. and you want to be done at 1 p.m., by all means, if you want to log on at 4 and be done at midnight, like that's again, that's up to you, but get your work done, right? So to that, again, you can configure this on or off based on the user, and you can again off on devices, and you can set the categories what's productive or not based on the user as well. So for him, if you really like it, so there's three categories: productive, unproductive, and neutral, which will comprise of the score when I get back here. So for him, you might just want to capture, okay, like how much time like in this week or what times was he doing that for my own sake? So you can tag the specific sites that you do or apps that you do want to track, just for trend lines. You can tag those for him as productive and move everything else to neutral because you don't necessarily care. So you don't so that won't necessarily hit that score. So it can be very custom configurable based on the user there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think that'd make him a whole lot more comfortable if I just said that our productivity tools are productive and whatever else we're not even going to bother with.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for jumping in with the question there, Jim. And based on default, it's you can set categories, and then based on those categories, so we're gonna have our default ones, right? Like where Netflix is going to be deemed not productive. If you move it to neutral, the AI the segmentation might capture if someone's watching Hulu, it's not going to make it unproductive, right? So you're not going to constantly be pulling things back and forth. It's going to follow the trends that you've set based on users and teams, and new sites and apps that pop up will fall into those similar categories. And then I think the big thing here is that like I'm sure everyone here can relate to is having dashboards is great, but if you can't really report on it and bring it internally and have things that can show that data without having to constantly be reminded, or having to go somewhere to get it, the automated reporting that can show you the data that you need to see when you need to see it is something that's critical for all businesses. So in terms of realities of the modern network, and I don't think it matters the size of the business. And usually, like there's two degrees to it, or two segments to it. When I think about it, there's the users, right, which are sometimes in the office, sometimes home, sometimes on a managed device, sometimes on a personal device. And then you have data on the web. You have data in SaaS apps that could be again EMR for medical, or again NetSuite for you know, hosted apps in general. But then Office 365, SharePoint. Then you have hosted servers in Azure and AWS in that whole realm. Then you have the stuff that's sitting on site, right? So mixed people being anywhere, accessing data from all kinds of different devices, and data being everywhere. Like it's just hard to manage. How do you have that central visibility, and how do you control really kind of who's getting access to the network and when? So too many products, not always. Too many locations, not always. But ultimately, this is kind of the reality that every business is facing. So the purpose of Timus is just again increase visibility, increase control, and minimizing your attack surface, which I'll talk more about into the next slide. So core components of what we're doing: zero trust network access, which is essentially going to it starts as like a VPN replacement. And when you think about VPNs, like historically, first and foremost, anyone you ask that is using them, they're probably going to tell you they hate it. It slows their computer down. They have to log in, maybe use MFA to get into it every single time. It's just no users particularly like it, and management doesn't necessarily like IT. The IT teams hate having to configure it, and having to keep up with it. So it's an always-on agent. And our perspective is if we're going to replace the VPN in the scenarios where VPNs are still being used in the first place, because I know a lot of people are not, we might as well ease the end user experience where it's touchless and effortless. So it will integrate with your Entra, Google, or Okta IDPs and can retain that SSO. And I'll talk more about single point of network to the entry to the network, but just wanted to list here kind of what is the core of like the nuts and bolts of what Timus is doing. And essentially, it's making it where remote users or people out of the office can access data securely, but based on the user, not based on the device itself, because of, again, that mix that we discussed before. So coming into the architecture, and I'll cover this high level, it's each user gets up to 4 devices, and that could be a laptop, tablet, phone, and up to again, two laptops. Jim, that employee who has that expensive device, I'm sure he's got other expensive devices sitting there. The developers love having machines, so
He
it could
has
be up
3
to
machines on top of all the tablets and phones and stuff.
that tracks, right? So we want to make it where it's like, and you're not kind of figuring that, like, 4 devices that's configured under that same username and password. But what's really kind of carrying this here are the Timus gateways. So we have a backbone of data centers around the world that are hosted in a mix of Oracle and AWS, which we do primarily for compliance. Oracle and AWS work with the government. We hear a lot about CMMC, occasionally NIST, that whole framework, or FedRAMP. But you kind of select your region, and we host that private gateway, which is a VM where all traffic will go through. You can enforce split tunneling. So Jim, to your use case again, for that user, like it's a BYOD device, you probably would only want that mission critical data going through the gateway. You don't need to see necessarily the personal stuff that he's doing, right? You want that business data going through securely encrypted to wherever it goes. So it's a single point of network entry. And what's important is it's a single static IP address. So when I think about multiple users, multiple devices, phones, laptops, tablets, again, in office, out of office, like, that's a scramble, right? That's a lot of different places where people are coming in from. And Entra and the different IDPs have made it easier for conditional access policies. But having 1 IP or 2 IPs, if users are really geographically dispersed or more, provides a ton of granularity and control. And that control, whether you're on-prem, I know there's the migration to the cloud. So when we think about SaaS apps and everything that's in the news, so like Office 365 and phishing and people taking tokens, and like the reality is we could tell users what to do. I'm sure that, Jim, you're going back to your developer. He's probably a bit savvier than the average end user, definitely more savvy than me. But stopping a brute force attack is ultimately what we're trying to do here. And where I'm going with that is, if you have a single IP address or a couple IP addresses, you can tell Slack all of the Office 365 suite, or pick which ones. But you could tell your applications, I want to allow list just the office address when they're in the office, and that Timus IP, right? Which is exclusive to your business. These are not shared gateways, by the way. So these gateways are, your company would be the only one coming through. So you could tell Microsoft it's coming from the office or it's coming from this IP. If not, I don't care if they have the credentials or not. And I'll talk more about kind of how that brute force would be eliminated. But again, you could post your credentials all over the web, again, if you want to. A disgruntled employee, someone who gets phished, ultimately having the credentials doesn't matter if it's done this way. It really reduces your attack surface to that 1 IP. Through that gateway, we can do, and we have built-in DNS filtering. And so that's web content filtering. So going backwards to the productivity tracking, you see someone's going to a site that, is it really fair? Maybe not. Is it work related? No. But are they using it too much? Maybe no. Your guess. So you can set rules within the Timus platform to say, this user is not allowed to access that site, and you can schedule it for those hours. When they're connected, they can't access it. So essentially, it's a firewall in the cloud. And from here as well, again, if you have servers in Azure, if you have servers on-prem, we can build IPsec tunnels to hit your local firewalls. So if you need to hit a printer on site, they want to ping their desktop that's on site for RDP. Ultimately, again, it's an always-on agent that's effortless for the end user, but that's getting them to everywhere they need to go. And on the side of the page, I put from on the configuration standpoint within the portal, you can configure it. Do I want it to be really always on for company managed devices? Probably. And if they need to disconnect, they can have it go through an admin. But you can configure all of this based on the user, based on the device, based on specific tags, etc. Again, I'll pause for a moment. I want to make sure that I'm not going too quickly, and I'm also answering questions that may pop up. Any comments or feedback questions here? And if no questions, and when was the last time you used a VPN, and did you like it?
I'm honestly, the one we've got, it got some drawbacks, but we're using WireGuard with the Ubiquiti router network, It's actually pretty damn nice. I click once, I'm on it. I click again, I'm off it.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thanks for that, Jim. And that's a good point because in the you see in the profiles on the right side of the page under tunnel protocol, it shows WireGuard. So we give the option for both for WireGuard or OpenVPN. WireGuard is a lot faster. But again, some people like OpenVPN and some different Wi-Fi networks, especially when you get international. Sometimes we'll yeah, be a bit funky with the different protocols, but that's good to know on the WireGuard with the Ubiquity. What we would do here is we would have it get configured to how you'd want it and have it set configured to that Ubiquity as well. I think the difference there would be again, having that control over the applications as well from an allow listing standpoint.
Oh yeah, it's real limited, but for effectively free, it was a good starting point. But getting beyond that is why I'm listening to the webinar today.
And absolutely, like I used to use at a previous job, not that we used a few different ones over the course of time, but it was definitely a pain. But they've gotten easier over time. So going back to the zero trust piece, I think this is kind of like one of those buzzwords. Like when someone says I'm going to the cloud, what does that really mean? Are they going to a hosted server in Azure? Are you going to Microsoft and moving that exchange off-prem? Probably a few years old at this point. So I want to talk about what does zero trust mean for us. And on the left side of the screen in the image, it's a list of 9 behaviors. And all of them only have one thing in common, which is that they are indicators that you might not be who you say you are. And there's purposely meant to be a little bit of overlap with what you might have with like a business premium plan with Microsoft. Because again, we want to like layer security where again, brute force is not going to shouldn't be possible. Again, I don't want to say can't because that's the bane of any company's existence in this world right now. But ultimately, if you're coming in from a new device, new country, impossible travel. I can't be in New York and London within an hour. Untrusted IP if they're using a known VPN like consumer VPN. But what's cool here is if these are triggered from a verification standpoint, you can say, okay, do I want them to use an MFA authenticator? If so, which one? If that fails, do I want them to maybe get a second chance with an email? And if not, going one layer deeper, do I want to ban and block that user or that IP address, which could be from like impossible travel? If that's triggered, and we want to shut that down, right? Someone has credentials somewhere and we want to block that user out. But ultimately, again, really minimizing that attack surface here. And the way that we work, again, my lens is I talk about networking all day. I talk about remote user connectivity all day, productivity all day with IT professionals. I know that there's a lot of other components to what makes a business run from an IT standpoint, whether it's again moving your existing VMware or again needing just migrations to cloud data center infrastructure. So I appreciate Ben on a side note. Thanks for having me here to talk about Timus, but I did want to kind of bring it also back to Brightworks and our working together. And making sure that we're delivering solutions that are keeping users connected and protected. And before I pause, I wanted to go through the slides, keep it somewhat concise, high level, and then leave some time for Q&A here. But I'll pause for a moment and thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Hopefully everyone got a chance to really get a chance to see the impactful message that we had today for you. Today's focus was very much keeping it a very high level for you, right? And that's what our webinars are all about, is making sure that we're touching on topics that are going to be impacting you on really what's keeping you up at night. What are some things that you're thinking about, and what are some technologies and solutions that are out there? And that's definitely what Brightworks does when we start working with partners like Timus. That's out there. So I really appreciate today's topic.
Ben, I'm going to come back here and go back to again that ultimately what we wanted to cover today was the connectivity piece, but also again just talking about how again that there's so many different ways again than the traditional senses of going through different metrics kind of one by one to can optimize your business through and through based on team application work and really understand how can we get better, and also again where are our gaps. So I know that we had some extra time here, so I do want to leave it open for questions. Anything on product or anything kind of brought up here today. Going to the page, wanted to go back to all about kind of efficiency, productivity, and kind of doing more with less here.
Is there any other questions that I can put in the chat? Otherwise, we can start to wrap up today's presentation today. What we'll do is we'll make sure this recording gets sent out to all the registrants for today's webinar, so you have that. And if you want to pass it along to others so they can kind of understand a little bit about efficiency and productivity and kind of doing more with remote workforce, we would be happy to engage and speak to you here at Brightworks and help you out with Timus Networks and all the different solutions that we have in our tool belt here. Otherwise, Jared, appreciate your time today, and I appreciate everyone that's had a chance to join us here, and those that are remote that are watching this later. We really appreciate you as well, clicking on that link as well to watch today's webinar. Otherwise, everyone have a productive day with your remote workforce, and we really appreciate you guys coming out.
Yeah, thank you for the comments coming in.
Thank you.
Nice meeting everybody.